Let me take you somewhere far away from your world of screens and schedules, traffic and deadlines. A place where the day moves not according to the buzz of a phone, but to the deep, measured toll of a bronze bell. Where the year itself seems to breathe more slowly, tied to the rhythm of the seasons, the rising and setting of the sun. Welcome to the boring historian. Now, if you have stumbled here looking for tales of sword fights, secret plots, or daring escapes, you may find yourself a little disappointed. This journey is not about kings or battles, nor about the noisy, dramatic side of history. This is about the quiet corners, the unnoticed hours, the lives that passed in steady, almost invisible repetition. And repetition, as you will soon find, is a kind of peace. Tonight, or perhaps I should say this morning, for in the monastery the day begins long before the sun. We will walk together through the life of a medieval monk. We will not rush. There will be no dramatic leaps in time. We will not skip over the small things. In fact, it is the small things that matter here. Our story will carry you from the first dark bell before dawn, through the soft candlelit hours of prayer, the scratching of quills in the scriptorium, the smell of herbs in the monastery garden, the quiet turning of the seasons outside these stone walls, until the final whispered prayers of the night. We will follow the monastic schedule, the horarium, as it might have been kept in a Benedictine monastery somewhere in England, perhaps in the 14th century. Though monasteries varied in detail, the essential rhythm was shared: prayer, work, study, and rest, repeated endlessly in service to God. The idea, in case you have not guessed, is not simply to tell you what happened in a day, but to let you feel it. The pace, the texture of the air, the sounds and smells and silences that made up this strange, ordered world. Now, before we begin our walk through the cloister, I would like to remind you, in the gentle, unhurried fashion of all monks, to subscribe to the channel. If you find these slow stories pleasing, think of it as joining our little lay brotherhood here, a fellowship of those who prefer the quiet turning of the past to the noise of the present. So, let us step over the threshold together. The stone is cool beneath our feet, worn smooth by centuries of sandals. Beyond the thick wooden door lies the monastery itself, enclosed by a high wall, cut off from the outside world except for the gatehouse and the occasional visitor. Inside, time is different. Here the clamor of the world fades. No carts rattle past. No merchants shout their wares. No music but the steady human voice, chanting in prayer. The air is damp. It always is, for the walls are thick, and in winter the cold seeps into the very stones. But there is a certain stillness here, the kind that makes you aware of the smallest things, the creak of wood, the flicker of a candle, the way your breath clouds faintly in the chill. It is the middle of the night, all is still, for now. But soon, the first sound will come, a sound that has marked the beginning of every day here for generations, the small, steady bell rung to summon the brothers from their sleep. It will be neither hurried nor harsh. It is not meant to shock a man into wakefulness, but to remind him gently that the work of the soul begins before the world has even stirred. And when that bell rings, in just a few moments, we will rise with the others, pull on the rough wool habit that has been our only garment for years, slip our feet into cold leather sandals, and move, in silence, through the dark halls toward the chapel, where the first of the day's 7 prayers will be sung. The night still belongs to the stars, but here in the monastery the day has already begun. We will start in darkness, and end in darkness, and in between, we will watch the light move slowly across these stone walls, as it has done for hundreds of years, and as it will do for hundreds more. The monastery is asleep, or at least as close to sleep as a place like this ever gets. Somewhere in the distance, in the barn perhaps, a sheep shuffles in its pen. Outside the cloister walls, a winter wind moves through the bare branches of the orchard, rattling them softly together. But within the dormitory, there is only the slow, even sound of breathing, the shared rhythm of dozens of men at rest. The brothers sleep in their habits, as they always do. The wool is coarse, but it keeps the body warm in the drafty stone building. The dormitory itself is a long, high-ceilinged hall, its roof beams lost in shadow above. Beds are not private here. Each monk has a simple wooden frame, a straw mattress, and a thin blanket. Privacy is not part of the life. Neither is comfort, at least not as the world outside understands it. Somewhere, far away in the depths of the building, a door creaks open. The sound is almost lost in the heavy stillness. But for those who have lived here long enough, it is a familiar sign. The monk whose duty it is to wake the others is making his way toward the small bell. He does not hurry. In the monastery, haste is an alien thing, like a gust of wind in a closed room. His steps are slow, measured, the leather soles of his sandals making a dull scuff on the worn flagstones. He passes through the cloister walk, where the moonlight spills through arched openings, striping the floor in silver and black. His breath is faintly visible in the cold air. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, it comes, the bell. It is not large, nor loud enough to startle. The sound is soft, almost muffled, as though the air itself has grown thick around it. A gentle ding-ding-ding, spaced carefully apart, each stroke fading before the next begins. It is not a sound to break dreams, but to invite them to end. The monks stir. First one or two, then the entire dormitory begins to shift and rustle with the small movements of waking bodies. There is no talking. Silence is still kept until after prime, the first daylight prayer, but the occasional cough or clearing of the throat breaks through the stillness. A few brothers cross themselves before rising. Others do it only after their feet touch the cold floor. The floor is always cold. In summer it is merely cool, but in the deep months of winter it seems to hold a chill drawn from the very bones of the earth. The first step onto it is enough to bring a man fully awake. The rough wool of the habit scratches against the skin as we move. There is no choice of clothing here. Every brother wears the same, a long undyed robe tied at the waist with a simple cord. Beneath it, a plain linen shirt, and sometimes, in the coldest months, a second one for warmth. The sandals are stiff, worn from years of use, the leather hardened by damp air and the occasional soaking rain. One by one the monks begin to file out of the dormitory, each carrying a small wooden lantern if they are among the ones responsible for leading the way. The lanterns are simple boxes with thin sheets of horn instead of glass, the light inside a trembling candle flame. The glow is small, barely enough to illuminate the floor ahead, but it is all that is needed. The path from the dormitory to the church has been walked so many times that the feet know it as well as the mind. We move in silence through the cloister again. The air here is colder than in the dormitory, for the arches are open to the night, and the wind from the orchard slips easily through. The lantern light catches on the stone pillars, showing the shallow grooves worn into them by centuries of hands passing along the same route. At last, the church doors rise before us, massive things of oak, blackened by age, bound with iron bands. They open slowly on heavy hinges, revealing the dark interior beyond. The only light comes from the sanctuary lamp, a single flame burning in a red glass vessel before the altar. Its glow is faint but steady, a small promise of warmth in the vast cold space. The brothers move to their places in the choir stalls, tall wooden seats carved with intricate designs, each one worn smooth where hands have rested over countless prayers. There is no jostling, no hesitation. Everyone knows exactly where to stand, just as they have every day for years, perhaps decades. And then, from somewhere near the front, a voice begins. It is low, steady, and deliberate, chanting in Latin the opening of Matins, the first prayer of the day. The rest join in, their voices blending into a single, unbroken sound that seems to rise and fill the stone vaults above. Outside, the stars still hold the sky. The day for everyone beyond these walls has not yet begun, but for us it has already been going on for some time. The church is vast and still. The air inside is colder than the cloister, for the stone walls hold on to the night's chill. The only warmth comes from the breath of the gathered brothers, rising faintly into the darkness above. You can almost see the clouded air near each monk's mouth when the candlelight catches it. The first notes of the chant echo softly, almost shyly, against the walls. The sound does not rush. It flows at the slow pace of the words themselves. Each syllable is given its due, stretched gently over notes that have been sung here for longer than any living man can remember. The Latin is ancient, its meaning clear to the monks but not urgent. The point is not speed, but presence. The sanctuary lamp flickers slightly in a faint draught, sending a shifting glow across the polished surface of the altar. Above it, the crucifix looms, carved from dark wood, its features worn smooth in places where centuries of eyes have rested. The shadows move across Christ's face as though he were breathing with us. Along the side aisles, tall iron candlesticks hold thick beeswax tapers, each flame swaying ever so slightly when a monk passes by. The light is golden and warm compared to the cold stone around it, but it barely touches the upper reaches of the nave. There the rafters vanish into shadow, and only the occasional glint of a roof beam or the dull gleam of an old brass fixture reminds you how high the ceiling soars. Matins is the longest of the daily offices, and it unfolds like a slow tide. A psalm is chanted, then a pause, then another, each is separated by a small reading from the breviary, the words delivered in a measured voice that never rises or falls much. Even the pauses have weight here. Silence in the outside world can feel empty, but here it feels alive, as though the air itself is listening. The smell of beeswax and old incense clings to everything. It seeps into the wood of the stalls, into the wool of the habits, into the very stones beneath our feet. Now and then, the faintest hint of damp earth drifts in from under the doors, a reminder that the world beyond the church is dark and cold and waiting. The brothers' voices weave together in perfect unity. There is no leader and no follower. Each voice is part of a single sound. It rises and falls like breathing. You can feel the vibration in the floor through your sandals, as if the stones themselves were humming along. A few of the older monks have been here so long that their voices carry a different texture, a slight rasp, the kind that comes from decades of chanting in all weathers, through all seasons. It gives the sound a kind of depth, like an old bell with a hairline crack that makes it ring more beautifully than before. In the side chapel, a small window of colored glass glows faintly in the moonlight outside. The image is of Saint Benedict himself, the father of this way of life, holding his rule book and a staff. By day, the window is bright with color, deep blues, ruby reds, and greens like summer leaves. But now it is just a dim patch of silver blue in the shadows. Another silent witness to the hours. Matins continues without hurry. This is not a service meant to be completed. It is meant to be lived through, step by slow step. Each psalm, each prayer, is another stone laid in the path that leads toward dawn. After what feels like both an instant and an hour, the final prayer is spoken. There is no applause, no shift in energy, just a subtle change in the silence that follows. The brothers bow their heads in unison, and then, without any signal beyond tradition, they begin to move again. The procession from the church is just as quiet as the one that entered. The doors close softly behind us, and the sound of the latch sliding into place is the only loud thing in the world for a moment. We step back into the cloister. The air is still cold, but there is a faint, almost imperceptible change to the light. The first suggestion that the night is beginning to loosen its grip. Above the orchard wall, the eastern sky is a little less black than it was. The day is not here yet, but it is on its way. And for a monk, that is reason enough to move forward. The cloister is still hushed, but now the silence feels different. The darkness is no longer complete. A faint silver glow touches the horizon, just enough to outline the shape of the monastery roof against the sky. It is not yet day, but the night has been softened, thinned at the edges by the promise of morning. The brothers walk the familiar path from the church toward the small refectory where a jug of warm water waits. No words are spoken. The sound of sandals against the worn flagstones is the only noise. The water is used not for drinking but for rinsing the mouth and waking the body after hours of stillness. It tastes faintly of the clay jug it has been kept in, the kind of taste that disappears once you no longer expect water to be cold. There is just enough time to wash the hands and face before the bell calls again. A gentler sound this time. The tone for the great clapper strikes slowly, leaving a pause between each note long enough for the sound to roll across the cloister and fade into the orchard beyond. Even the birds have not yet begun their chorus. Lauds is a prayer of greeting for the day. It begins in the same place as Matins, the church. But now there is a sense, still subtle, still restrained, of forward motion. The candles are still lit, but now, here and there, small pools of grey daylight seep in through high windows. They fall onto the flagstones in soft shapes, showing the dust that floats lazily in the air. The chanting begins again, though this time the psalms chosen speak of dawn, of light rising after darkness. The rhythm is still unhurried, the syllables drawn out like a slow breath, but there is warmth in the sound. The voices of the monks carry a little more resonance now, as though their bodies have woken enough to add strength to the tone. In the pauses between verses, you can hear the faint sound of the wind brushing past the outer walls. It smells faintly of wet grass and distant wood smoke, a reminder of the village beyond the monastery where fires are already being lit in hearths. Somewhere out there, bakers are kneading dough, and the earliest farmers are stepping into their fields. Though here inside the walls, the pace remains unchanged. The altar cloth, white and simple, is touched by the first direct ray of sunlight. It slips through one narrow window, catching the embroidery in gold thread that the light reveals only at this time of day. The brothers, Dante, look directly at it. Their eyes remain on their books, but the room itself seems to acknowledge it. The stone appears less cold, the shadows less heavy. A hymn is sung, one that has been part of Lord's since before this monastery was built. It speaks not of grand events, but of the small, daily mercies that each new day brings. The words flow slowly, their meaning not meant to be rushed or conquered, but dwelt upon like a warm cup held in both hands. The abbot's voice closes the service with a blessing, and again there is no applause, no visible relief. This is simply one more step in a day that will be built from many such steps. Still, you sense in the bowed heads a quiet readiness, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what lies ahead and meeting it without fear or haste. When the monks step back into the cloister, the transformation is clear. The sky is no longer a gradient of black and gray. It is pale blue now, with streaks of rose in the east. The orchard trees, bare of leaves this time of year, stand in precise rows that cast long shadows across the frost-glazed grass. Somewhere in the stable, a mule stamps its hoof, impatient for its morning feed. The brothers begin their separate tasks. Some turn toward the kitchen to prepare the morning's bread. Others head for the gardens to check the frost covers laid over the winter herbs. One or two walk toward the scriptorium, where their work of copying manuscripts will begin once the light is strong enough to read by without straining the eyes. But before any of that, there will be a short period of private prayer, each monk alone, in his own corner of the church or garden, speaking silently to God or simply sitting in the presence of the morning. The day is still young, and it will be lived not in leaps, but in measured, deliberate steps. Just as it has been for centuries here, the sun is still low, its light soft and pale. When the monks make their way toward the gardens, the path to the garden winds beneath the covered cloister, then opens into the outer yard. A thin frost coats the ground, crunching faintly beneath their leather sandals, but the monks pay it no mind. The cold is an old companion here, and the day's work waits for no one. The monastery garden is not a single plot, but a careful arrangement of several. One is for vegetables, another for herbs, and beyond them lies the small orchard. Each is enclosed by low stone walls that hold the soil in place and keep wandering animals out. The stone is worn smooth, where generations of monks have leaned their elbows while weeding or pruning. The vegetable plot is neat in its winter arrangement. Rows of hardy greenscale, winter cabbage stand quietly in the cold. The earth between them is dark and damp, its smell rising faintly in the crisp air. A monk kneels here, using a simple wooden-handled hoe to loosen the soil. The motion is slow, deliberate. He pauses often to clear small stones, placing them in a wicker basket. Near the herb beds, another brother bends over a row of rosemary, brushing frost from its narrow leaves. He works with bare fingers despite the chill, careful not to damage the brittle stems. The scent of crushed herbs lingers in the air, mingling with the faint smoke drifting from the kitchen chimney. These herbs are rosemary, sage. Thyme will flavor simple meals in the refectory and also be dried for the infirmary, where they will become teas and poultices for the sick. The orchard beyond the wall is quiet now, its apple and pear trees standing bare-limbed against the sky. Their twisted branches form patterns that look almost like the writing in an old manuscript, lines and curves without haste. A pair of monks move slowly among them, each carrying a small clay pot of pitch. They dab it carefully onto cuts made by winter pruning, sealing the wood against frost and disease. No one hurries. The pace is not born of laziness but of habit, of the knowledge that the garden is a living thing that responds poorly to impatience. Each movement is mindful, bending to pull a weed, pressing soil gently around a root, pausing to study the angle of a branch. The sound of tools is subdued, the dull scrape of the hoe, the soft thud of soil falling back into place, the faint rustle of dry stalks being gathered into bundles. A blackbird hops along the garden wall, pausing to tilt its head at the workers before darting away into the orchard. From the far end of the garden comes the slow creak of the water wheel turning in the stream. It powers the small mill used to grind grain, but here in the garden its sound is simply another layer in the background hum of the monastery, a reminder that life is turning steadily, whether seen or not. One monk stands, stretching his back after tying up the last bundle of dead stalks. His hands are roughened by years of such work, the skin lined and dark from soil, yet his face is calm, eyes soft. He does not look at the garden with pride in the modern sense, but with the satisfaction of one who knows his task is both service and prayer. For the monks, tending the earth is not separate from worship, it is worship, a form of silent praise in action. Before leaving, they pause at the toolshed. Each hoe, rake, and spade is cleaned of clinging soil, wiped dry with a rag, and returned to its place. The handles gleam faintly from the touch of many hands. It is an unspoken rule that no tool is left unkempt. Care for the tool is care for the work, and care for the work is care for God's creation. When they finally turn back toward the cloister, the sun is higher now, spilling light across the frost until it begins to soften and vanish. The air is warmer by a degree or two, enough that the smell of earth and herbs seems stronger. The work has been quiet, repetitive, but never meaningless. The garden will feed not only the body but the soul. As they pass beneath the covered walkway, the distant bell begins to sound again, chilling them to the next rhythm of the day, the gathering in the scriptorium. The tools are behind them now, but the calm of the garden stays in their movements, their breathing, even in the way they open the great wooden door that leads inside. The bell fades into silence by the time the monks step into the scriptorium, the air inside warmer than the cold stone corridors they've just walked through. The room smells faintly of beeswax ink and the dry, papery scent of vellum. High narrow windows let in a thin wash of winter daylight, but it is not enough to work by. Small oil lamps and tall candles flicker gently on each desk, casting halos of light around the workspace. The scriptorium is long and narrow, with heavy wooden desks arranged in a neat row, each facing a window so the scribe can use whatever daylight the day allows. The benches are plain but worn smooth by years of use. At each desk lies the same set of tools: a smooth sheet of scraped vellum or parchment, a quill cut to a fine point, a small knife for trimming, and a shallow dish of dark ink. A sand-filled pot sits nearby for drying fresh letters. One monk, his head already bent, begins by trimming his quill. The small knife glides with practiced precision, shaving away slivers of the feather until the nib is just right. He tests it with a few strokes on a scrap of parchment, thin, even lines that flow without blotting. Satisfied, he sets the knife aside and dips the quill into the ink. The sound in the room is unlike any other in the monastery. It is not the clang of tools in the garden or the echo of footsteps in the cloister, but something softer. The slow scratch of quill on vellum, the faint click of the knife against wood, the tiny hiss as sand is poured across fresh ink. Every so often, a chair creaks quietly as a monk shifts his weight. The work is not fast. Each letter must be formed carefully, evenly, according to the script the monastery has used for generations. The page grows slowly, a black river of words flowing down in measured lines. The scribe does not look ahead to the end, only to the next letter, the next curve of the quill, the next word. Further down the row, another monk works on illumination. His desk is brighter, with an extra lamp placed close at hand. He dips a fine brush into a shallow dish of gold leaf paint, his hand steady as he traces a delicate border around the first letter of a page. The gold catches the candlelight, glowing softly like the halo in a painted saint's portrait. Around the gold, he adds curling vines, tiny flowers, and the occasional bird or animal details so small they would be lost at a glance, but reward the eye when studied. In a corner, an older monk is repairing a damaged manuscript. The parchment is cracked, the ink faded to a soft brown. He works slowly, cleaning the page with a fine cloth, then reinforcing weak spots with paper so thin it is nearly transparent. His hands are spotted with age, but his movements are deliberate and sure. He murmurs softly as he works, perhaps a line from the text itself, letting the words pass through his lips as he restores them. The light shifts slightly as a cloud passes outside, dimming the windows for a moment before the sun reappears. The monks do not notice. Their eyes are on their work, and their rhythm is steady. To them, this is not merely copying words, it is an act of devotion. Each line, each letter, is as much a prayer as any spoken in the chapel. By preserving these texts, scripture, commentary, even ancient histories, they preserve the memory of the world itself. Hours pass quietly. The ink pots are refilled from a larger jar kept in a small cupboard, and the candles are trimmed to keep their flames steady. Occasionally, a scribe pauses to roll his shoulders or stretch his fingers before returning to the task. The sound never rises above a gentle whisper of tools. When the bell rings again, marking the next hour of the monastic day, the monks set down their quills. They place thin boards over the vellum to protect the wet ink and cover their gold leaf so it will not tarnish. Each desk is left in perfect order. The work will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. In the life of the monastery, the scriptorium's work is never truly finished, is simply carried forward by steady hands, day after day. The monks rise in silence and make their way back through the dim corridor, their eyes adjusting to the shadows. Outside, the garden waits in the winter sun, and somewhere in the kitchen, the scent of midday broth begins to fill the air. The soft peal of the midday bell drifts across the cloister, echoing against the stone walls before fading into the winter air. The monks gather from their various tasks, some from the gardens, some from the scriptorium, others from quiet corners where they've been mending clothes or repairing tools. Footsteps sound in the covered walkways, slow and measured. No one speaks. They move toward the refectory, the great dining hall of the monastery. The heavy wooden door swings open to reveal a long vaulted room, lined with tall windows. their glass panes faintly wavy from centuries of imperfect blowing. Pale daylight streams in, pooling gently across the worn flagstone floor. The air smells faintly of warm broth, freshly baked bread, and the faint tang of herbs. Down the center of the room run two long, sturdy tables of thick oak, flanked by benches smoothed by countless meals. At the far end, a lectern stands ready. In this place, eating is not accompanied by conversation. Instead, one monk will read aloud from scripture or from the writings of the saints, so that the meal nourishes both body and soul. The monks file in, each pausing to bow slightly before taking his place at the table. Their habits swish softly as they sit, hands resting calmly in their laps. Before the meal begins, the abbot signals for a brief prayer. All heads bow. The murmur of Latin rises in unison, a blessing for the food, for those who prepared it, and for the continued strength to serve. From the kitchen, a pair of younger brothers emerge, carrying large earthenware bowls of steaming soup. The broth is simple: lentils, onions, carrots, and a scattering of cabbage leaves, seasoned with bay and parsley from the garden. It is not rich, but it is warm, hearty, and filling. The bowls are placed along the tables, and the steam curls upward into the cool air. Beside each place is a thick slice of bread, coarse, dense, and dark from whole grains grown in the monastery's own fields. The crust is firm, the inside soft. A small wooden cup of ale or watered wine sits beside the bread, a humble drink for a humble meal. The meal begins quietly. Each monk ladles a portion of soup into a wooden bowl, breaking the bread into it to soften. The sound is gentle spoons against wood, the occasional swallow, a soft sigh as warmth spreads through chilled hands and stomachs. At the lectern, today's reader clears his throat softly and begins. His voice is low but steady, carrying clearly through the room. The words are from an ancient sermon, their cadence slow and rhythmic. Phrases rise and fall in the old Latin, the meaning known to all, even if the language is not the tongue of everyday speech. The monks eat without haste, chewing slowly, listening. The combination of steady voice and steady eating has a lulling quality. The refectory feels insulated from the world, no wind, no noise from beyond the walls, only the soft rhythms of voice, spoon, and breath. Occasionally, one of the serving brothers passes by with a fresh loaf of bread or refills a cup. There is no rush, but there is also no lingering. Each knows that the day's work will resume soon enough. The food is sustenance, but the meal is also a form of discipline. To eat simply, without distraction, with gratitude. When the bowls are empty and the bread gone, the reader concludes the passage and steps down from the lectern. A final prayer is spoken, thanking God for the meal. The benches scrape softly as the monks rise together, pushing them neatly back under the tables. The bowls, spoons, and cups are gathered up and carried to the kitchen, where they will be washed and warm water heated over the great hearth. The scent of soup still lingers in the room, mingling with the faint smell of smoke from the kitchen fire. Outside the refectory, the monks disperse once more, some returning to the scriptorium, others to the gardens or two small workshops where tools are repaired and garments sewn. The meal has been brief, but its warmth will carry them through the next hours of quiet labor. In the refectory, the sunlight shifts slowly across the tables, touching the edges of the benches before retreating toward the wall. The room stands empty once more, waiting for the next bell to call them back. The midday meal has ended, and the monastery begins to hum again with the quiet industry of the afternoon. Outside, the sun hangs lower in the sky, filtering through slow-moving clouds and casting a soft, pale light over the cloister walls. The air is cool but no longer biting, and a faint breeze moves gently through the trees. Beyond the cloister walkways lies the heart of the monastery's self-sufficiency. The gardens. These are no mere ornamental flower beds. They are carefully planned plots of vegetables, herbs, and fruit trees, laid out in neat rows and bordered by gravel paths that crunch softly underfoot. A group of monks, clad in the same humble brown habits, moves toward the gardens with quiet purpose. Each carries a simple tool, a hoe, a rake, or a small trowel worn smooth from years of use. No one speaks. The work itself is a form of prayer, a silent offering of labor to God. The vegetable plots are the first to be tended. Low winter crops push their way up through the dark, fertile soil, kale leeks, and hardy cabbages with tight, green heads. The monks bend to their tasks, loosening earth around the roots, removing stones that might stunt growth. Hands, though roughened by years of labor, work with gentle precision. From time to time, the faint caw of a rook drifts down from the trees at the garden's edge. Somewhere in the distance, a sheep bleats. Otherwise, the only sounds are the rustle of leaves, the soft chop of a hoe, and the rhythmic scrape of a rake moving through soil. A few rows away, another pair of monks works in the herb garden. Here, fragrant plants thyme, rosemary, sage, and bay grow in tidy squares, each marked with a small wooden sign. Even in the cool air, their scents rise when brushed by a passing robe or touched by careful fingers. These herbs are more than flavoring for the kitchen. They are also valued for their medicinal properties, used to make teas and salves for the infirmary. The fruit trees stand further back, their branches bare in the winter light, save for a few stubborn leaves clinging on. The monks move among them slowly, checking for signs of damage, trimming back wayward branches with small, sharp blades. Every cut is deliberate, nothing is wasted, nothing is done in haste. Near the far wall of the garden, a compost heap steams faintly in the cool air, the rich scent of decomposing vegetation blending with the earthiness of the garden beds. A monk with a wheelbarrow approaches, tipping in the trimmings from the morning's work. The cycle is never broken. What is taken from the earth is returned to it, to nourish the next season's growth. Occasionally, the monastery's Catan aging tabby with a torn ear wanders through the rows, pausing to watch the monk's work before disappearing behind a low hedge. No one shoos it away. The cat is a familiar presence, part of the daily rhythm. Time in the garden moves differently. There is no rushing, no glancing at clocks. The monks work steadily until the sound of the next bell calls them elsewhere. It is not a chore to be finished, but an act to be performed with care, no matter how small the task. One young brother kneels in the soil, planting a row of young garlic bulbs, pressing each into the earth with the same attention one might give to laying a cornerstone. Beside him, an older monk straightens slowly from his work, stretching his back before returning to the slow raking of leaves. Their movements seem unremarkable to an outside observer, but here, each motion is part of a living tradition, centuries old. The air grows cooler as the afternoon wanes. The sun dips lower, touching the tops of the cloister walls with a faint golden light before slipping behind a drifting cloud. A thin mist begins to gather at the edges of the garden, curling around the bases of the fruit trees and the low stone walls. Finally, the bell tolls from the tawara, slow, deliberate sound that echoes over the garden. The monks pause, set their tools neatly in the shed, and brush the soil from their hands. They walk back toward the cloister, leaving the garden in perfect order, ready to receive the quiet of evening. Behind them, the rows of vegetables stand in neat lines, the herbs nod gently in the breeze, and the fruit trees stretch their bare limbs toward the darkening sky. The garden rests now, until tomorrow's steady hands return. The garden is behind them now, its faint sense of rosemary and turned soil fading into the cooler, shaded air of the cloister. The monks move quietly along the covered walkway, their soft steps echoing faintly under the stone arches. Ahead lies the infirmary, a simple but vital part of the monastery, where the sick and weary find rest. The door to the infirmary is heavy oak, worn smooth by years of gentle hands pushing it open. Inside, the light changes instantly here. The air is still and warm, lit by the muted glow of small oil lamps hung from iron hooks in the wall. The windows are narrow slits, letting in only a soft trickle of daylight. The room is lined with wooden beds, each neatly made with linen sheets and woolen blankets. The smell here is distinct, a mixture of herbs, beeswax, and the faint, earthy scent of straw mattresses. It is not unpleasant. Rather, it carries the sense of a place where time slows even further, and every movement is measured for quiet. A few monks lie resting, their faces pale but peaceful. Some are here with lingering fevers, others recovering from the aches of age or injury from farm work. At one bed, a young brother reads softly from a leather-bound book, his voice barely above a whisper, the words falling into the room like warm rain. Along the far wall, a long table holds the tools of the healer's trade. Earthen jars of dried herbs, chamomile, sage, yarrow, and comfrey stand in careful rows, each labeled in precise, faded script. Wooden bowls, small knives for preparing poultices, and linen bandages are neatly arranged. The monastery's healer, an older monk with hands lined like weathered bark, moves slowly among the jars, selecting what is needed for the afternoon's treatments. He works with the same patience seen in the gardens. A handful of dried chamomile flowers is crushed in a mortar, the pestle turning in slow circles until the scent fills the room. Water is warmed in a small copper pot over the hearth, and the steam carries the fragrance toward the beds. The infusion will be served in small clay cups, bringing comfort and easing restless sleep. In another corner, a salve is being prepared. Beeswax melts gently over a low flame, and the healer stirs in rosemary oil and ground comfrey leaves. The mixture, once cooled, will be used to soothe sore joints and heal small cuts. The scent of rosemary mingles with the faint sweetness of the wax, a smell both calming and steadying. One monk sits at the edge of his bed, hands clasped loosely in his lap. His breathing is slow, and the healer kneels beside him, applying the warm salve to his knee with careful, circular motions. No words are exchanged. The act itself is the communication, a language of touch, care, and shared silence. From time to time, the soft tread of sandaled feet crosses the room as another brother brings fresh water or adjusts a blanket. The infirmary is never hurried. Here, every action is given its own unbroken moment, so that nothing is rushed and nothing is forgotten. In the farthest corner, the small infirmary chapel stands open. Its altar is plain, a single candle, a wooden crucifix, and a cloth embroidered in simple patterns. Those well enough to walk may sit here in quiet prayer, asking for healing or simply listening to the muffled world beyond the walls. Outside, a gentle rain begins to fall. The sound is faint, at first a whisper against the roof tiles, then steadier, a soft drumming that seems to wrap the infirmary in a cocoon of sound. Inside, the monks go on with their quiet work, unaffected by the changing weather except for the added peace it seems to bring. The healer finishes tending to his last patient for the afternoon. The herbs are returned to their jars, the tools cleaned and dried, the beds are straightened, and a small fire is built in the hearth to keep the air warm as evening approaches. One by one, the resting monks drift into sleep, their breathing blending with the rain's steady rhythm. When the next bell tolls in the distance, the healer moves toward the door. He pauses for a moment, looking back at the rows of still forms, then steps into the cloister once again. The rain has washed the air clean, and the scent of wet stone and fresh earth drifts on the breeze. The infirmary remains behind him, a place of healing and stillness, where care is measured not in haste or noise, but in the quiet, unbroken dedication of hands that have worked this way for centuries. The rain still falls softly outside, but within the stone walls of the monastery, the sound is only a faint murmur. The healer steps away toward his next duty, and the viewer's attention turns to another building entirely, the scriptorium. It sits on the south side of the cloister, a place set apart for the most delicate and enduring of the monks' labors. The copying of books. Here, words are preserved for centuries, each letter placed with the same care a gardener gives to planting seeds. The door creaks faintly as it opens, revealing a long, narrow hall lined with desks. Each desk faces a narrow, arched window, positioned so that daylight falls directly onto the work surface. Yet even with the windows, the room is dim, and small oil lamps are set at each station to chase away the shadows. The air smells faintly of parchment, scent like dried grass, and dust and of ink, sharp and metallic. The monks who work here are already at their tasks. They sit on wooden benches, their backs straight, their heads bent slightly forward. Each one holds a quill, cut from the feather of a goose or swan, the tip sharpened to a fine point. Before them lies a sheet of vellum, smooth and pale, stretched taut to accept the ink. There is almost no sound in the scriptorium except for the scratch of quills moving slowly across the page. It is not a hurried sound. It is steady, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. Now and then, the faint tap of a knife trimming a quill tip interrupts the rhythm. A monk might pause, look upward briefly to rest his eyes, then bend back to his work. At one desk, a brother dips his quill into a small inkwell made of horn. The ink inside is a rich black, made from a mixture of iron salts, oak gall, and gum. He lifts the quill carefully, tapping it lightly against the inkwell's rim to shed any excess, then lowers the tip to the vellum. The first stroke of each letter is precise, its curves deliberate. He shapes the tall vertical lines of a capital letter, then moves on to the smaller script, each word forming in a slow, graceful march across the page. In another corner, an illuminator works on the decoration of a manuscript. His desk is scattered with small pots of pigment, deep blue from crushed lapis lazuli, warm red from cinnabar, green from verdigris. He works with a brush so fine it could pass through the eye of a needle, painting delicate vines that curl around the margins. Each leaf and flower drawn with patient care. A thin sheet of gold leaf lies on a square of red cloth beside him, waiting to be applied. When he lifts it with his brush and presses it gently onto the page, the gold catches the light from the window, glowing as though it carries its own flame. The work in the scriptorium is not simply a craft. It is a prayer in itself. Each letter is written as an act of devotion, the words of sacred scripture or ancient learning copied with the understanding that they may endure long after the monk's own life has ended. In this way, the scriptorium holds not just books, but a kind of immortality for both words and hands. The hours pass slowly here. Outside, the rain stops, and a pale light filters through the windows, brightening the vellum pages. The monks do not hurry to take notice. Their pace remains unchanged. Every so often, a brother will stand, stretch his legs quietly, and walk to the sand table in the corner. Here, freshly written pages are dusted with fine sand to dry the ink before the sheets are stacked or bound. In the farthest part of the room, shelves rise almost to the ceiling, each one lined with bound manuscripts. Some are new, their bindings tight and their pages clean. Others are ancient, the leather darkened and cracked, the pages worn soft from many hands. A faint scent of old paper lingers in this part of the scriptorium, rich and dry like the breath of history itself. When the bell for the next prayer sounds, the scratching of quills comes to a slow halt. One by one, the monks close their inkwells, clean their brushes, and place their pages in neat stacks. They rise without haste, leaving their desks exactly as they were, so that when they return, they may begin again without a moment wasted. The scriptorium grows quiet again, empty except for the faint light through the windows and the silent ranks of books along the walls. It will wait patiently for its caretakers to return, as it has for centuries. The bell has sounded, its deep voice carrying through every corridor and courtyard. The monks emerge from the scriptorium, the gardens, and the kitchens, each moving with the same unhurried pace toward the heart of the monastery, the cloister walk. The cloister is a square of open sky, framed by stone walls and covered arcades. Its center is a small green lawn, trimmed neatly, with a simple stone fountain at its heart. Around this open space runs a covered walkway, each side lined with evenly spaced arches that open toward the grass. These arches are like windows into another world, the calm interior world of the monastery. The stone floor beneath the monks' sandals is worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Some stones have slight dips in them, the work of countless souls passing the same way every day, year after year. As they walk, the sound is soft but distinct, a muted shuffle, a faint creak of leather, the whisper of robes brushing against stone. This walk is not for haste. It is a place for thought, prayer, and quiet connection with the rhythm of life here. Each step falls in time with the next, creating a slow, meditative beat that matches the breathing. For some monks, the cloister walk is where prayers are recited silently. For others, it is a place to let the mind wander gently, observing the changing seasons through the open arches. Today, the air smells faintly of wet stone and damp earth after the morning rain. The fountain in the center trickles steadily, the sound mingling with the distant caw of a rook perched high on the monastery's outer wall. Through one arch, the viewer sees Brother Thomas tending to a patch of herbs near the edge of the cloister lawn, rosemary, sage, and thyme, their small leaves darkened by the rain. The scent drifts faintly into the walkway, sharp and fresh. Along the northern wall, a row of narrow benches stands beneath the arches. A few older monks sit there quietly, their hands resting in their laps, gazing across the green. Their eyes follow nothing in particular. A cloud passing overhead, a small bird hopping through the grass, a leaf trembling on its stem. They do not speak. Here words are rarely needed. The cloister is also a place of memory. The stone pillars and arches have stood through storms, summers, and snowfalls. They have seen new novices take their first steps as monks, and have watched old brothers take their last walk, their pace slowed by the weight of years. In a way, the cloister records the life of the monastery, not in ink and parchment, but in the echo of footsteps that never truly fade. Brother Matthew, passing along the southern arcade, runs his hand lightly over one of the stone columns. His fingertips trace the shallow grooves carved there long ago, the marks of the mason's chisel still faintly visible despite the centuries. The stone feels cool and slightly rough under his skin, grounding him in the present moment. The light shifts as clouds move overhead. Now the sun breaks through for a few brief minutes, and the arches cast long, sharp shadows across the floor. These shadows stretch and slide as the day moves on, marking the passage of time in a way more subtle than the ringing of any bell. Every so often, a novice hurries past, his youth and inexperience making his pace a touch too quick for the calm of the cloister. An older monk might lift a gentle hand, reminding him without words to slow down, to breathe, to walk as if there is nowhere to be except exactly here. The walk continues in silence. In the corners where two sides of the cloister meet, small stone carvings decorate the arches, leaves, flowers, and simple knot patterns. Some have been worn nearly smooth, others remain surprisingly sharp, as if the mason just set down his tools yesterday. The carvings are not elaborate, but they hold a quiet beauty, meant to be discovered slowly. Perhaps after years of walking past them without notice, after several turns around the square, the bell sounds again, this time calling the monks to the chapel for the next prayer of the day. The brothers turn toward the doorway leading inside, their sandals making the same soft whisper on the stone. The cloister empties gradually, its open space left in silence once again. The fountain continues to murmur at the center. The shadows keep shifting, and the cloister waits, knowing that soon the same slow procession of feet will return, as they have done for generations. The bell's echo fades as the monks file into the refectory, the long dining hall where midday's single warm meal will be taken. The air inside is still and cool, carrying the faint mingling scents of baking bread, simmering vegetables, and damp wool from robes that have not yet fully dried from the morning rain. The refectory is a high, narrow room with plain stone walls, unadorned except for a simple wooden crucifix hanging at the far end. Long, heavy tables run its length, each flanked by sturdy benches, polished smooth by decades of use. Sunlight streams in through narrow, high-set windows, landing in soft rectangles on the worn flagstone floor. Dust motes drift lazily through the light, slow as the movement of the monks themselves. At the head of the hall stands a wooden lectern. It is here that one brother will stand during the meal to read aloud from a sacred text, his voice steady and unhurried, carrying gently to every corner of the room. This is a meal not only for the body but for the soul. The words, like the food, are meant to nourish. Before seating themselves, each monk pauses for a moment of silent prayer, bowing their head over the place where they will sit. The benches creak softly as they take their seats in a slow, unified motion. There is no clattering of chairs, no scraping of feet, just the collective quiet of men well accustomed to the rhythm of shared silence. The meal is simple. A loaf of coarse brown bread set in the center of each table, a large earthenware bowl of steaming pottage made from lentils, onions, and cabbage, and a smaller dish of fresh herbs from the garden, parsley and chives chopped finely. There is also a small jug of ale for each table, brewed in the monastery's own cellar. The scent of the bread, still warm from the oven, is rich and comforting, carrying faint notes of smoke from the kitchen hearth. A novice moves down the line, ladling pottage into each wooden bowl. He works carefully, making sure every serving is even. When a drop spills onto the table, he quickly wipes it away with the edge of his sleeve, glancing around as though to make sure no one has noticed. An older monk sitting nearby catches his eye and gives him a small, understanding nod. Mistakes are part of learning, and here, learning is patient. The reader begins his passage from the lectern. His voice is low and even, with the cadence of someone who has read aloud for many years. He does not hurry. Each phrase is given its full shape, each pause allowed to linger. His words weave a gentle background to the soft sounds of eating, the tearing of bread, the quiet sip from a cup, the muted clink of a spoon against a wooden bowl. No one speaks. In the silence, other details emerge, the faint creak of the beams overhead as they settle in the midday warmth, the occasional call of a bird from outside the window, the steady rhythm of spoons stirring in bowls. The food is taken slowly, each bite chewed with care, as if to stretch the simple meal into something large. At one table, an older monk slices a piece of bread in two, offering half to the novice beside him. The gesture is wordless, yet full of meaning, a small act of sharing that is repeated here daily, until it becomes part of the meal itself. Near the end of the meal, the bread baskets are mostly empty, and the bowls have been scraped clean. The pottage is not a feast, but it is filling, and no one leaves the table hungry. The reader closes his book and bows his head briefly in prayer. All around the hall, the monks do the same, giving silent thanks before rising together. The benches shift back with a collective groan of wood on stone. Bowls and cups are gathered, not with the haste of servants clearing a feast, but with the steady rhythm of men who know the day's work will continue soon enough. The novices carry the dishes to the kitchen, where another set of tasks, washing, drying, and stacking, will be done in the same calm silence as the eating. The refectory empties, leaving the scent of bread and cooked vegetables lingering in the cool air. The dust motes still drift in the slanting sunlight, and the crucifix still hangs quietly at the far wall, unchanged by the passage of yet another meal in the endless cycle of monastery life. Outside, the bell will soon call the brothers to their afternoon labor, but for now, the refectory rests in its own stillness, waiting for the next time the tables will fill, the benches will creak, and the soft voice at the lectern will begin again. The bell's tone drifts over the cloister once again, low and steady, and the monks emerge from the refectory into the pale sunlight of early afternoon. The rain from the morning has eased, leaving the air washed clean and smelling faintly of wet earth and herbs. The sky is a soft, hazy blue, scattered with slow-moving clouds that cast brief, gentle shadows over the monastery grounds. In this hour, the brothers scatter to their appointed tasks. Some head toward the gardens beyond the south wall, baskets in hand. Others make their way to the workshops, the carpentry room, the scriptorium, or the small, dimly lit forge where tools are mended. The division of labor is well established. Each man knows his role, and the work begins without discussion or instruction. The monastery gardens are a place of order and quiet industry. Narrow paths divide the beds into neat rectangles, where rows of vegetables and herbs grow in careful lines: carrots, cabbages, onions, parsley, sage, and rosemary. Wooden stakes mark the borders, and small wicker fences keep the rabbits out. The soil is dark and damp, clinging to boots and the hem of robes. One monk kneels at the edge of a cabbage bed, his hands wrapped around a small iron hoe. He draws it through the earth in slow rhythmic strokes, loosening the soil around the plants. With each movement, the smell of damp earth rises, rich, loamy, and faintly sweet. A few feet away, another brother bends to gather parsley leaves, cutting them gently with a small knife and placing them in his basket. The sound of the knife slicing through stems is barely louder than the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. In the far corner of the garden, a novice carries 2 wooden buckets of water suspended from a yoke across his shoulders. He moves carefully, the buckets swaying, water sloshing close to the brim. When he reaches a row of young onions, he kneels to pour the water slowly, watching the earth darken and drink it in. The air is filled with the mingling scents of damp greenery, fresh herbs, and sun-warmed wood. Beyond the gardens, in the carpentry workshop, the steady sound of work carries through the open shutters. A long workbench runs beneath the windows, scattered with tools, chisels, planes, saws, and hammers, all worn smooth from years of use. The scent of fresh-cut wood mixes with the faint tang of linseed oil. A brother leans over the bench, running a plane along the edge of a plank, the shavings curling away in long, pale ribbons that fall softly to the floor. At another bench, a novice sands a small stool, turning it slowly in his hands to smooth each edge. He works with quiet concentration, pausing now and then to run his fingers over the surface, searching for rough spots. In the corner, a finished ladder leans against the wall, ready to be carried to the orchard later in the week. The forge is smaller, its light dim and flickering from the glow of the hearth. A blacksmith monk stands before the anvil, holding a small iron hinge in tongs. He taps it gently with a hammer, the sound ringing through the room in a measured, metallic rhythm. This is not the hurried, heavy pounding of a city forge. Here, each strike is deliberate, the work slow and precise. A faint smell of smoke and hot metal lingers in the air. Across the courtyard, the scriptorium is a world apart from the gardens and workshops. It is cool and shaded, the windows narrow and set high in the wall. A row of desks lines the room, each with a low stool and a slanted surface for writing. The air smells faintly of ink, parchment, and beeswax from the candles. One monk sits with a quill in hand, his head bent over a sheet of creamy vellum. The only sound is the soft scratch of the pen, the faint rustle of his sleeve against the desk. At another table, a brother carefully applies gold leaf to the edge of an illuminated letter. He works with a tiny brush, his movements so small they are barely noticeable. The gold catches the light, gleaming faintly before being pressed flat with a smooth, polished stone. This work is slow and exacting. A single page may take days to complete, but in the monastery time is measured in patience, not speed. Throughout the afternoon, the work continues at the same steady pace. No one hurries, and no one idles. The labor is not for profit or acclaim, but for the needs of the community and the quiet offering of skill and service. Whether it is a cabbage planted, a hinge repaired, or a letter inked, each task is part of the same rhythm. The life of the monastery turning with the seasons, steady and unchanging. By the time the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, shadows stretch longer across the cloister. The air cools again, and the smell of wood smoke drifts faintly from the kitchen. Soon, the bell will call the monks back together, drawing them from garden, workshop, and desk to the evening's prayers. But for now, the day's work continues in silence, each man absorbed in his own task, the monastery breathing quietly around them. The day tilts toward its closing hours, and the light begins to soften, taking on a deep golden hue that slips gently over the stone walls and across the cloister walk. The shadows lengthen, stretching like dark fingers between the pillars. The air carries a coolness now, a whisper of the night to come. Somewhere beyond the outer fields, a blackbird calls, its song floating briefly before fading into the stillness. Then, the bell sounds. Its low, resonant tone rolls across the monastery grounds, summoning every monk from garden, workshop, and scriptorium. One by one, they emerge from their work, walking in unhurried silence toward the chapel. Wooden tools are set aside, buckets placed carefully in corners, parchments covered to shield them from dust. It is not a rush, more a gradual gathering, as if the monastery itself is breathing in and drawing its people close. The procession moves through the cloister walk, the sound of sandaled feet faint against the worn stone floor. The long shadows cast by the pillars sway slightly as the monks pass, their brown wool habits brushing softly against their legs. Some carry the faint scent of their work, the smell of herbs from the garden, wood dust from the carpentry room, or warm parchment and ink from the scriptorium. Inside the chapel, the air is cooler, touched with the smell of beeswax candles and old incense absorbed into the stone over centuries. The tall, narrow windows filter the fading light, casting bands of pale gold across the flagstone floor. The altar stands at the far end, simple but dignified, draped in clean linen. A single candle flickers there, its flame steady in the still air. The monks take their places in the wooden stalls, arranged in 2 long rows facing one another. The wood is darkened by centuries of use, its surface polished smooth where hands have rested during countless prayers. There is no conversation, only the occasional quiet shuffle as a brother adjusts his robe or lowers himself into his seat. The silence here feels not empty, but full, a space where the day's noise, such as it is, can settle into stillness. When all are gathered, the chant begins. It rises softly, a single note at first, then expands into the warm weave of voices blending together. The sound fills the chapel, not loud, but complete, like the slow unfolding of a tapestry. The words, in Latin, are as familiar to the monks as the very rhythm of their breath. They do not rush the syllables. Each one is given its full shape before yielding to the next. The evening prayer is Vespers, the traditional service that greets the coming night. Psalms are sung in a measured, almost rocking cadence, like the slow sway of a boat on calm water. Outside, the setting sun slips lower, its light now slipping into orange and rose, filtering through the high windows and painting the stone walls in gentle color. The chants seem to float in that light, their echoes curling upward toward the vaulted ceiling before falling softly back to the ear. Between psalms, there is a pause, a silence so deep that one can hear the faint rustle of a robe, the small creak of a wooden stool, or the sigh of wind slipping through a narrow window crack. This is not an awkward silence, but one steeped in purpose. A shared quiet where each man turns his mind inward, offering thanks for the day and seeking peace for the night ahead. After the psalms comes the Magnificat, the Song of Mary, sung with a reverence that feels almost weightless. The harmonies linger a moment longer in the air, as if reluctant to leave, before dissolving back into stillness. As the service draws to its close, a final prayer is spoken. The voice is steady, measured, as though it has been spoken in this same way for centuries. The words are a soft benediction, a blessing over the monastery, its walls, its gardens, and its people over the night, and the work and rest that it will bring. When the last Amen has been said, the monks bow their heads briefly, and they rise in the same quiet order in which they came. The sun outside has now dipped low enough that its light is only a faint glow behind the hills. A coolness slips through the chapel door as it is opened, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and distant smoke from a village hearth. The brothers step out into the cloister again, the sky above shifting from gold to the softest lavender. A crescent moon has begun to shine faintly above the eastern wall. The first star appears, small and steady, while the blackbird's song is replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. They move toward the refectory for the light supper that awaits, but the quiet of the Vespers lingers with them, a soft thread woven into the close of the day. The monastery, bathed now in twilight, stands as it has for centuries, patient, enduring, and deeply at peace. After the final notes of Vespers have drifted into memory, the monks file slowly toward the refectory, the monastery's dining hall. The transition from the hushed glow of the chapel to the refectory is seamless, as if the rhythm of their steps carries the prayer forward into the evening meal. The air here is warmer, touched with the mingled scents of fresh bread, simple vegetable stew, and herbs dried earlier in the summer and now steeping in a large pot. The refectory is long and narrow, with high timber-bird ceilings and rows of sturdy wooden tables worn smooth by decades, even centuries of use. Along the walls, candles burn in rotarun holders, their flames flickering gently in the draught from the great oaken doors. At the far end of the hall stands a lectern. Tonight, As on most nights, one monk will read aloud, while the others eat, the slow, measured words intended to nourish the spirit, as the food nourishes the body. This practice is centuries old, meant to remind the community that even the simple act of eating is part of their devotion. The brothers take their places without fuss or noise. Each has his own seat, but not from ownership, rather, from a quiet continuity that helps preserve order. The bowls and wooden spoons rest neatly in place, set out earlier by the kitchen brothers. The bread sits in baskets in the center of each table, its crust golden and still faintly warm. Earthen jugs of cool water stand ready, condensation forming faintly on their surfaces. When all are seated, the abbot gives a brief nod and a prayer of thanks is spoken. Simple words of gratitude for the food, for the work of the hands that prepared it, and for the Creator's care in sustaining the community. There is a pause afterward, a shared breath of silence, before the meal begins. The stew is ladled into bowls, the soft sound of wooden spoons against earthenware mixing with the faint murmur of the reading monk's voice. He begins with a passage from a devotional work, his voice calm and unhurried, each word clearly formed. The sound fills the hall without pressing against it, like the gentle echo of a distant stream. The monks eat slowly. The food is plain, but it is prepared with care. Carrots and leeks softened in the pot, beans lending body to the broth, a touch of thyme and marjoram bringing a subtle fragrance. The bread is dense and hearty, baked from flour milled in the monastery's own mill. Each bite is taken without haste, the rhythm of chewing matching the slow, steady pace of the reading. Though conversation is rare during the meal itself, there is an occasional exchange of quiet words between brothers when necessary, a request for more bread, a soft thank you as water is poured. These are whispered, respectful of the shared listening. Outside the high windows, the sky has deepened into a rich indigo, with the first real glimmer of moonlight filtering through the glass. The reading continues, weaving gentle reflections on humility, patience, and service into the atmosphere. The words seem to merge with the aromas of the food, the steady glow of candlelight, and the muted clink of spoons against bowls. For a moment, time feels suspended, not gone, but slowed to a pace that belongs entirely to this place. When the meal is finished, the bowls are gathered in quiet efficiency, and the reading draws to a close. The abbot offers another short prayer, one of gratitude and blessing, marking the transition from sustenance to evening rest. The brothers rise together, pushing back their benches with only the faintest scrape on the stone floor. Some will assist in the cleaning, rinsing bowls at the stone basin, wiping the tables with damp cloths, sweeping up crumbs from the flagstones. The smell of the meal lingers in the air, a fading echo of warmth, before the cool night air drifting through the open door replaces it. Outside the refectory, the cloister is now lit by a silver wash of moonlight. The monastery feels even more still than before, the day's labors fully behind them. The head lies compline, the last prayer of the day, and then the quiet of their cells. But for now, there is a sense of calm fullness, not the fullness of indulgence, but of a life lived with steady intention, one step at a time, in a rhythm that has guided generations before them. The monks drift from the refectory in small silent groups, their sandals whispering against the cloister walk. The sound fades until only the distant chirp of a night insect can be heard. The candles inside the hall continue to burn for a while longer before being extinguished one by one, leaving only the memory of their glow. The monastery settles deeper into its night. Outside the stone walls, the world beyond may stir with noise or rest in its own quiet. But within these walls, the heartbeat of the community continues, measured, steady, and at peace. The path from the refectory to the chapel is short, yet it feels like a gentle journey into another kind of quiet. The air has cooled noticeably since the evening meal, carrying with it the faint sense of damp stone and late summer flowers that grow in the cloister garden. The moonlight spills across the worn flagstones, pooling in the corners of the arcade like pale water. One by one, the monks make their way along the cloister walk, the soft leather soles of their sandals whispering with each step. Their habits shift lightly with the movement, the fabric catching occasional flickers of candlelight from the lanterns mounted along the wall. No one speaks. It is not a silence of rule alone, but of shared understanding. The day has grown long and thin, and words would feel too heavy now. The chapel door stands open, a dark, welcoming arch. Within, the air is cooler still, as though the stone has been storing the memory of centuries. The scent here is layered, beeswax from the candles, faint incense from earlier services, and the dry smell of old wood from the choir stalls. Candles already burn along the altar, their flames steady and small, casting halos of light that tremble slightly whenever the door opens. Compline is the last of the canonical hours, the night prayer. It is a service of closure, of placing the day into God's keeping before rest. There is something almost tender in its simplicity. The monks gather in the choir stalls, each settling into the familiar embrace of polished wood, hands folded loosely, heads inclined. The abbot stands at his place, his silhouette outlined by the soft gold glow from the altar. The service begins not with loud proclamation, but with a humble invocation. The voice of the officiant, low and steady, "O God, come to our aid." The response comes in unison, "O Lord, make haste to help us." The words seem to hang in the air for a moment before gently dissolving into the quiet. A psalm is sung, not hurried, not ornate, but in the plainchant tones that have carried these prayers for 1,000 years. The voices blend into something that feels older than the walls themselves, each note resonating off the stone until it is no longer just sound, but something like a soft vibration in the very air. The candles throw long shadows across the flagstones, their light catching the edges of carved stone capitals and the faint gilding on the altar. As the psalm continues, the moonlight through the high windows mingles with the candlelight, creating a soft silver-gold haze in the upper reaches of the chapel. After the psalm comes a short reading from Scripture, chosen to remind the brethren of trust and watchfulness in the night. The words speak of lying down in peace, of resting in the assurance of divine care. They are not delivered with force, but with a calm weight, as if each syllable is meant to be carried inward and held quietly. There is a pause for examination of conscience, time to recall the day's actions, to offer them up, and to let go of any lingering burdens before sleep. The silence here feels deeper than the one in the cloister, as if the very stones are listening. You can almost hear the breath of each monk, the faint rustle of a sleeve, the creak of the wood as someone shifts slightly in their seat. A hymn follows, its melody slow and even, like the rhythm of a boat rocking on still water. The words speak of the coming night as a time not of fear, but of rest under the watch of the eternal. Finally comes the blessing. The abbot raises his hand, tracing the sign of the cross in the air. His voice warm but quiet, "May the Lord grant us a quiet night and a perfect end." The response, spoken by all, is a simple Amen. The effect is not dramatic, yet it feels complete. The day's circle now fully closed. The monks rise, not with the bustle of departure, but with the unhurried grace of those accustomed to this ritual's pace. They bow toward the altar before leaving the choir stalls, filing out into the night, 2 by 2. The chapel is left with only the soft hiss of candle flames and the faint scent of incense lingering in the stillness. Outside, the cloister garden lies under a spill of moonlight. The sound of a distant owl drifts in, a gentle reminder of the wider night that stretches beyond the monastery walls. The monks walk quietly toward their cells, their figures moving like shadows across the pale stone. Soon the doors will be closed, the lamps extinguished, and the monastery will settle into its most profound silence. Compline has done its work, the day has been set to rest, and with it, the minds of those who prayed it. The cloister is almost entirely dark now, save for the occasional soft flicker of a wall lantern guiding the monks back to their cells. The night air feels cool against the skin after the warmth of the chapel, a freshness that smells faintly of damp earth, stone, and the distant hint of wood smoke from the kitchen chimney. Every footstep is deliberate, not rushed, as if hurrying would be out of place in the deep stillness that has settled over the monastery. The corridors leading to the sleeping quarters are narrow, the walls thick, their stone surfaces worn smooth by countless hands brushing against them over generations. Shadows move gently along these walls, cast by the small flames of oil lamps, each halo of light trembling faintly as someone passes. Somewhere far off, you might hear the faint creak of a door closing, then silence again, deep and undisturbed. Each monk's cell is small, spare, and nearly identical. A plain wooden door, a simple latch, and inside, an uncluttered space designed for nothing more than rest and contemplation. The walls are whitewashed, their surface uneven in places, catching the dim lamplight in subtle ripples. A single wooden bed stands in the corner, its mattress filled with straw, covered with a woolen blanket that is warm but coarse to the touch. At the foot of the bed rests a small chest for personal items, though few monks own much beyond a spare habit, a rosary, and perhaps a well-used devotional book. A narrow table sits against one wall, bearing a single candle in an iron holder. The wax has melted down the sides in slow, frozen streams, marking the passage of evenings past. The candle is lit upon entering, its flame steady in the still air, casting gentle shadows across the bare walls. There is also a wooden crucifix above the bed, not ornate, but carved with care. the grain of the wood still visible beneath the soft sheen of years. Before lying down, the monk kneels beside the bed, resting his folded hands on the rough wool of the blanket. The words of a final private prayer are spoken silently, lips barely moving, breath even and unhurried. These are not grand petitions, but quiet offerings. Thanks for the day, contrition for faults, and trust in God's protection through the night. The prayer might be accompanied by the faint creak of the bed frame as the monk shifts, or the subtle whisper of cloth as he adjusts his habit. Once the prayer is finished, the candle may be snuffed out immediately, plunging the room into darkness, or left to burn a little longer, its warm glow softening the edges of the simple furniture. Outside the small window, often just a narrow slit in the wall, the night sky spreads wide and dark, sometimes revealing a scattering of stars, sometimes holding only the silver gleam of the moon. Through that opening, the faint sounds of the world may drift in, the low hoot of an owl, the sigh of wind moving through leaves, or the soft patter of rain on the cloister roof. The monk lies down slowly, pulling the blanket over himself, feeling the shift of straw beneath his weight. The texture of the wool is familiar against his skin, a little rough, but comforting in its constancy. He settles into stillness, the rhythm of his breath matching the quiet rhythm of the monastery itself. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard might creak as another monk prepares for sleep. After that, the silence becomes complete, so complete that even the faint beating of one's own heart seems to be part of it. In this stillness, the day is allowed to dissolve, the labors, the prayers, the small aches in the hands and back from work in the fields or scriptorium. The mind, trained over years to find peace in order and routine, drifts naturally toward rest. There is no anticipation for tomorrow's tasks, no worry for the world beyond the monastery walls. Only the present moment remains, wrapped in darkness and the faint scent of wool, candle smoke, and old stone. As sleep comes, it is almost impossible to pinpoint the moment when waking thought gives way to dream. The transition is gentle, like a slow tide pulling one into deeper waters. Outside, the night continues its quiet work. Clouds move across the face of the moon. The wind shifts direction, and somewhere in the distance a fox might cry out once before silence returns. The monastery sleeps as one, dozens of small cells, each holding a single monk, each breathing in time with the steady, ancient rhythm of this place. Tomorrow will begin early, as always, with the call to matins before dawn. But for now, there is only the comfort of the narrow bed, the darkness that feels like a sheltering cloak, and the knowledge that the day has been set to rest with care, just as it has been for generations upon generations of those who lived this life before. Midnight in the monastery is not an hour marked by bells or bustle, but by the complete surrender of the building to stillness. It is a stillness so deep that it feels as though the very air has stopped moving, as if the stone walls themselves are holding their breath. The last flickers of candlelight have been extinguished, leaving the cloister's chapels and cells wrapped entirely in darkness, a darkness made all the heavier by the thick medieval walls that block the faint glow of moonlight from reaching deep inside. The corridors, so familiar in daylight, now seem like silent rivers of shadow. The flagstones beneath your feet, if you were walking, would be cold, each step echoing faintly, yet the sound would not travel far, as though the night swallows it. The air is cool and smells faintly of old wood, the temps of iron from the hinges and locks, and the distant hint of incense that lingers in the chapel from the day's final service. Most of the monks are deep in sleep, their breathing steady in their small cells, but here and there, a restless soul might be awake, not from worry or unrest, but from the simple habit of rising in the night to pray. You might imagine one such monk quietly leaving his bed, wrapping his woolen robe around his shoulders, and padding silently to the small oratory at the end of the corridor. There he lights a single candle, the flame shivering briefly before settling into a steady glow, casting a soft golden halo on the whitewashed walls. He kneels, the wood of the prie-dieu creaking faintly, and bows his head into private prayer, words too soft to disturb the silence around him. Beyond the monks' quarters, the great cloister garden lies in shadow, its neatly kept paths barely visible in the moonlight. The fountain at its center murmurs softly, the sound blending with the faint rustle of night air moving through the leaves. A small breeze carries the scent of damp earth moss, and the faint sweetness of herbs planted in the kitchen garden nearby. Rosemary, sage, perhaps a few late lavender stalks. The breeze comes and goes, as if hesitant to disturb the monastery's rest. In the refectory, the long wooden tables and benches stand empty, their surfaces faintly shining where they have been scrubbed clean after the evening meal. The tall, narrow windows are dark, only the faintest outlines of the mullions visible against the dim light outside. The great hearth that warmed the room earlier is now cold, the scent of charred wood and ash lingering faintly in the air. Even the scurrying of the occasional mouse along the edges of the floor seems subdued, as though the small creature too understands that this is a place of quiet. The chapel itself, heart of the monastery, is still and solemn. The altar rests under its linen cloth, the silver candlesticks standing empty, their wax stubs waiting for tomorrow's services. The carved wooden pews hold only shadows now, and the stained glass windows, invisible in the darkness, guard their colors for the return of the sun. Somewhere near the apse, a votive candle may have been left burning, its tiny flame an unblinking eye of light in the vast dark, its wax pooling slowly in a brass dish. Outside the main walls, the world is equally subdued. The fields lie in silence under the moon, their rows of crops unmoving. A narrow dirt road runs past the monastery gate, empty now except for the occasional rustle of a nocturnal animal crossing, perhaps a hedgehog or a fox. In the far distance, the faint hoot of an owl echoes, answered by another call from somewhere beyond the woods. These sounds are not interruptions. They are part of the great fabric of the night, woven softly into the stillness. Within the monastery the night passes slowly, unmeasured by clocks. Time is felt more than counted. The gradual deepening of darkness, the shift of the air as the hours stretch toward dawn. In the cells, the monks sleep peacefully, each dream perhaps shaped by the rhythm of their day. A psalm half remembered, the smell of fresh bread from the morning, the feel of warm sunlight on the cloister stones. The sound of their breathing, if one could hear it, would be like a gentle tide, rising and falling in perfect unison. Somewhere, in a small alcove near the library, a candle burns low beside a pile of manuscripts left open on a table. Perhaps one monk, entrusted with careful copying of a text, has fallen asleep before finishing his work. The quill lies beside the parchment, its tip still dark with ink, and the candlelight flickers gently over the half-written lines. Outside the narrow window, a cloud drifts past the moon, changing the quality of the light just enough to make the shadows shift. Midnight in the monastery is not a moment to be hurried through. It is the deep inhale before the day's exhale, the perfect stillness that makes the next morning's chants all the more resonant. The silence is not emptiness, but fullness, full of the weight of stone, and wood, and faith, and years upon years of nights just like this one, stretching back further than memory. The transition from night to morning in the monastery does not happen with a single ringing bell or the sudden blaze of sunlight. It begins almost invisibly, in ways so subtle that you could miss them if you were not paying close attention. The air changes first. No longer the heavy, still air of midnight, but something faintly fresher with the cool promise of the coming dawn. The walls, which held the night's chill, now feel as though they are quietly warming from the inside out, as if they, too, are preparing for the day. In the monks' cells, dreams begin to loosen their hold. The steady breathing of the brothers changes slightly. A shift of the blanket here, the faint creak of a straw mattress there. Somewhere down the hall, a door latch clicks gently, and the soft shuffle of bare feet against stone marks the first stirring of life. It is not yet the full waking of the monastery, but the beginning of it. The faint ripple before the tide turns. In the oratory, a single candle is lit by the hand of the night porter, the monk assigned to keep watch and tend to any needs during the small hours. His movements are slow, practiced, and soundless. The flame throws long shadows across the floor and makes the carved wood of the altar glow as if alive. The porter checks the side doors, ensures that the cloister gates remain barred, and then retreats to his place by the entrance, where he sits quietly, hands folded in his sleeves, listening to the breathing silence. Outside, the sky is still dark, but not as dark as it was. There is a faint lightning near the eastern horizon, a change so gradual that it feels more like a memory of light than the light itself. The stars remain visible, but they have softened, their sharp brilliance dulled by the earliest wash of morning color. The fields beyond the monastery walls are quiet, yet the roosters in the nearby village, creatures ruled by a time older than clocks, have begun to call. Low at first, then more insistent, their voices carrying faintly through the damp air. Within the kitchen, one monk, always an early riser, begins the day's work before the rest. He moves through the room lit only by the orange glow from the banked embers in the great hearth. Kneeling, he stirs the coals and feeds them dry kindling, listening to the soft crackle as the fire wakes from its slumber. The warmth slowly pushes back the chill, and soon the smell of burning wood and warming iron fills the air. He sets a kettle over the growing flames, its metal sides catching the firelight in a dim shimmer. Meanwhile, in the scriptorium, the desks stand empty, their ink pots covered, quills resting on clean scraps of parchment. But a thin ray of pre-dawn light has begun to touch the high windows, outlining the lead frames in a pale gray. The stillness of the room is complete, but it feels poised as if holding itself ready for the day's quiet industry to begin. The cloister garden remains wrapped in shadow, though the outline of the fountain is more visible now, the water catching the faintest suggestion of light. The herbs give off a stronger scent in the cool air, mint, thyme, and the sharp tang of sage. Somewhere in the hedges a small bird stirs, rustling the leaves. It is the first bird of the morning to wake, and its tentative chirp sounds startlingly loud in the otherwise perfect quiet. Back in the dormitory, the prior, second only to the abbot, rises. His day begins earlier than most, for he must ensure that all is in readiness for matins, the early morning prayer. His wool robe, heavy and coarse, falls around him as he steps silently into the corridor, a small lantern in his hand. The light brushes over the stone walls, catching in the worn grooves where centuries of monks' hands have touched as they walked. He stops by the cells, listening, and in some cases tapping gently to rouse the slower risers. There is no rush. This is a place without haste. The first faint sounds of the waking monastery are not voices, but the creak of wood, the shuffle of sandals on stone, and the soft swish of woolen sleeves. A cough, quickly muffled, the distant splash of water as a monk washes his face at the communal basin, the quiet click of rosary beads being turned between fingers. Outside the chapel, the bell rope hangs ready. Soon, it will be pulled, the sound of the great bell rolling across the dark fields to call the brothers to prayer. But not yet. The monastery exists in this narrow band of time, no longer night, not yet morning, a breathing space in which the past day has ended and the new day has not quite begun. It is a moment both ordinary and sacred, repeated every day for centuries, a moment when the monastery feels like a living thing just beginning to stretch and open its eyes to the dawn. And somewhere, in the smallest corner of that stillness, the very first note of the day's harmony is quietly forming. The moment arrives without ceremony, though it has been centuries in the making. The prior, standing near the chapel door, nods to the bell ringer. The rope is grasped in two firm hands, and with a slow, measured pull, the great bell's tongue swings against its bronze sides. The sound is not sudden or jarring. It begins as a low, resonant hum that gathers weight and spreads outward like ripples on water. It moves through the cloisters, along the stone corridors, and into the cold air of the courtyard. It pours over the walls into the fields beyond, reaching the scattered cottages and stirring the village dogs into soft barks. The bell's voice is deep, solemn, and patient, each note allowed to breathe fully before the next is struck. From their cells, the monks emerge, one by one. They move without haste, their sandals whispering over the worn flagstones. The hallway is dim, lit only by the lanterns fixed at intervals, the flames trembling as they pass. They bow slightly to each other in greeting but do not speak. The rule of silence still holds until after the morning prayers are complete. The chapel awaits them, its wooden doors open to reveal the warm glow of candles within. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of beeswax and old incense. Shadows flicker on the stone pillars, giving the impression that the saints carved in the capitals might be shifting slightly in the light. The brothers enter in single file, moving to their assigned stalls, the same ones they have stood in for years, in some cases, decades. The abbot is already in his place, his head bowed, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. When the last monk has entered, the prior gives a subtle sign, and the service begins. Matins is not a hurried affair. It is the first formal prayer of the day, and its pace is deliberate, as if every syllable must be given space to take root. The chanting starts low, a single voice intoning the first lines of the psalm. The sound is unaccompanied, human in its simplicity, and it spreads slowly, the other voices joining until the air is filled with a steady, weaving harmony. There is no theatrical rise and fall here, no sudden swell of emotion, only the gentle persistence of devotion, like the tide coming in. The words are in Latin, a language many of the brothers learned not from books alone, but from the daily rhythm of prayer itself. To a stranger, they might be mysterious, but to the monks, they are as familiar as the beating of their own hearts. Between the psalms, there are pauses long enough for thought to wander, not away from the service, but deeper into it. The flicker of a candle draws the eye. The faint, cool draft from the open chapel door brushes the skin. The sound of a distant rooster, muffled by the thick walls, slips in between verses. All of these become part of the prayer, folded into the fabric of the moment. As Matins draws toward its end, the first true light of dawn enters the chapel. It comes not as a sudden blaze, but as a slow illumination, a pale silver that seeps through the high windows and gently pushes back the shadows. The faces of the monks, once lit only by candles, now carry the soft hue of morning. When the final words are spoken, the abbot makes the sign of the cross, and the brothers bow their heads in unison. There is a moment of stillness, not empty, but full, like the held breath after a piece of music has ended. Then, quietly, they turn and file out, the silence still unbroken. Outside, the world has changed. The eastern sky is flushed with the first color of sunrise, a warm gold spreading across the horizon. The cloister garden glistens with dew, each droplet catching the light like a tiny jewel. The fountain's water sparkles now, its murmur sounding livelier in the open air. The air itself feels different, lighter, with the faint warmth of the coming day. The monks separate into their duties. Some head toward the kitchen to prepare the morning's meal. Others return briefly to their cells to fetch tools or cloaks. A pair make their way to the garden, where the day's tending will begin. In the scriptorium, shutters are opened, letting in the clear light that will guide the steady work of copying manuscripts. But for all this quiet activity, the monastery remains what it has been for centuries, a place where time moves differently. Each day begins like this, not in haste, but in a careful unfolding. Each step linked to the one before it, as much a part of the whole as a stone in the cloister walkway. The rising of the sun marks the true beginning, but for the monks it is simply another turn in the unbroken wheel of devotion, labor, and rest. And somewhere in the slow, steady rhythm of it all, there is a kind of peace that belongs entirely to this place, a peace as constant as the ringing of the morning bell. And so our long walk through a day in the life of the medieval monastery comes to its quiet close. We began in darkness, and we end in light, but the work and the prayer continue, as they have for generations. The monastery sleeps, wakes, and breathes in a rhythm older than memory, carrying its days forward into the centuries to come.